And welcome to Liquid Margins, and this is Annotation for All, how social reading centers student belonging. And just a note that we were scheduled to have two guests today, but one of them, Ayla Moore, had a conflict at the last minute and so had to bow out. So apologies for that. We will try to get Ayla on a future show. Our guest today is Larnell Dunkley. And Larnell is Associate Professor of English and African American Studies at Harold Washington College, which is part of City Colleges of Chicago. And our always exceptional moderator is Jeremy Dean. He's the VP of Education at Hypothesis. And we also have a couple of our colleagues who will be in the chat. And if you have specific questions about how Hypothesis works or social annotation in general, that are not being addressed here, you can ask those and Becky George will answer you. And I might too. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Jeremy. So again, thank you all for coming here today.
It's great to be here, folks. Thanks for joining us. Larnell, excited to have a conversation with you today and hear your story. We share a background as English professors, so maybe we can talk a little shop at some point, but I'd like to start just by getting to know you a little bit more. Can you just sort of introduce yourself and tell us about where you teach and the school you teach at and the subject that you teach, what courses?
Sure thing. My name is Larnell Dunkley, and I'm an Associate Professor of English and African American Studies at Harold Washington College, which is one of the City Colleges of Chicago. So I work at the downtown campus. So I work in an urban two-year institution. I've been there for about 16 years as a full-time faculty member. I teach courses in English 101, English 102, literature, such as Introduction to Literature, African American literature. And then because of my research interests in African American literature, a few years ago, I was certified to teach Introduction to African American Studies. So I do teach a class in the social sciences department.
That's great. Tell me a bit about English 101 at Harold Washington and the City Colleges of Chicago. Is that a course that a lot of the students have to take?
Yes, it is. It's a gateway course. It is required. I have taught English 101, the traditional freshman composition course, but over the past few years, I have taught English 101-97, which is actually a 6-hour course where the first hour and 20 minutes is composition, and then the next hour and 20 minutes with the same group of students, it focuses on grammar support, reading and grammar support. So those students have me literally 6 hours a week, or 3 hours and 20 minutes twice a week. So that's the course that I'm currently teaching. This class is usually roughly 20, 25 students. They're from diverse backgrounds. And as usual with a 16-week semester, there's a lot to cover, especially in terms of like their writing skills, their reading skills also, but also making sure they get the necessary grammar support that they need to move beyond English 101 and to go on to English 102. So this particular course is really, I try to tailor it every semester to the needs of that class, especially the grammar support, because it varies from semester to semester.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if this is an interesting point to sort of transition and hear your take on the subject of the conversation today, which is student belonging. I don't know if that's a term that you think about as a teacher or as a scholar, but what does student belonging mean to you and why is it important? And specifically maybe in the context of, teaching at Harold Washington, teaching in the City Colleges of Chicago, maybe teaching English 101.
Well, student belonging, I usually start the class with emphasizing that we, the class, and I are a community of writers, and we're a community of readers. And I recognize that the students come from diverse backgrounds. I have students from various countries in Europe, some from Africa. When they write about their personal, when they have the first assignment's a personal narrative. So I usually get students who talk about immigrating from Mexico or leaving their homeland to come to America to pursue the American dream. So because of that diverse background, their diverse backgrounds, I initially try to include them as part of a community. We're a community of learners, we're a community of readers, we're a community of writers. It's okay to share your experiences. Your experiences are valuable and worthy of talking about, because I always have a student who says to me, I have nothing to say. And I have to tell them, well, look within yourself. You have a lot to say. Use yourself and use your experiences as a starting point. And so once we break down those barriers in terms of like, you are a part of this community, that you are a part of this classroom, and then we can kind of move forward with specific writing assignments. And the class size really helps with that smallness, because we really get to know each other and our backgrounds. Now it's a little different now because it's remote. But when I was in the classroom before COVID, there was a strong sense of like, I can see you, we have different strengths in different areas that we need to work on, but we can do it together. It's like a teamwork atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned the pandemic. Are you still working remotely now?
Yes, I am.
And so your students, courses that you used to teach face-to-face are now remote. Has that exacerbated the sort of, tensions around student belonging, about making students feel like they're part of a classroom and a collegiate community?
I would say, I think it's changed. At least that's my perception. Because to kind of backtrack a little bit, when everything changed to remote, I was on sabbatical. So I was reading about everyone's experiences mid-semester, I guess around this time, 2 years ago, about this sudden change. And prior to that, I had taught online courses. So I was already used to teaching online, but remote was a little different. So when I started teaching remote the summer of 2020, I believe it was 2020, I had to feel like I belonged, because I felt like the outsider, because I'm like, well, this is remote. This is a little different. I can't do what I did before I went on sabbatical this time around. And so every semester, there was a sense of me trying to figure out, what can I do to engage the students so that we all feel like we're connected, even though we're on the computer. And sometimes I can see their faces, sometimes I can't. I just know you by a voice or something. There's still that disconnect, but I always try to figure out what, through the technology, how can we feel like we're still a part of this community? So I think it's gotten, for me, I think it's gotten better. I don't get that feeling of like there's, oh, I don't like remote learning from the students, or there's a disconnect. I feel like we're kind of used to it now, and we're still grappling with the technology. There's still some technological issues in terms of students having access to technology, or doing something on a phone and I don't realize they're doing it on the phone. So I have to find another way for them to access the material. But I think it's gotten better now. I think it's still, I still feel like, I'm thinking about this semester, I still feel like I'm connected to them, even though there's still that sense of disconnect, like we're on the computer and we could be anywhere.
Yeah. Well, so tell me about how social annotation and about hypothesis have played a role in your course, both generally, like how you've used it, but also how it's, helped or intersected with your attempts to help students feel like they belong and that they're part of a community.
Well, every semester, I've tried to think of ways to make the class engaging. So once I got through summer of 2020, when I realized, okay, this is what remote learning is, I need to think of new ways to make the class interactive, because I also teach African American Studies course, which could be prone to lecture. I try not to do lecture, but it has that slant to it. Whereas the writing courses that I teach, I tell students the only way you can learn how to write is to actually write. And I need to see you write and, and be there to help you. So I think it was the fall of 2020, I went to a faculty development workshop at school, and one of my colleagues discussed how she used hypothesis in her class. And as I saw hypothesis in action, the light bulb went off in terms of, well, this is an interesting way to get the class talking. Even though it's through the computer screen, this is a very interesting way to get the class talking and engaged about whatever it is we're looking at. So while I was watching the demo, I was thinking in the back of my mind, well, I could do this with a student paper, or maybe with a text, because my sabbatical project was on open educational resources. And so when I returned to the classroom, I started using open educational resources. So that was a factor too. Well, how can I bring this text into the class in such a way that I can see that they're engaged? Because I never want to make assumptions that they did the reading or they understand the reading. So I wanted to see that they were engaged. I wanted to see in real time how they were engaging with the text. So I started experimenting with it in fall of 2020 with let me just try it. Let's just do this in real time. Let's just see how they respond to this text. And I'll just give you an example of this. In my African American Studies class, once I learned how to pull pages from a PDF file, like specific pages, they were reading a book called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And it was our final day of discussion about the book. So I wanted to have a final day of discussing this book, where this man who's writing basically a letter to his son about what it means to be Black in America. You know, what does it mean to be constantly be seen as an outsider in American society, that you are not perceived as a person, you're perceived as a threat, your life could be taken from you at any moment. So there's this one section in the book, in the last part of the book, where this woman who's very successful talks about how despite her success as a doctor, her son was still killed by the police. And this class is very well, it usually is racially diverse, meaning I have Latinx students, African American students, I have Caucasian students. And this is a class that has no prerequisites, so anyone can take it, but it fulfills a diversity requirement. So I was curious to see, like, well, I wanted to use this woman's commentary about, even though she's very successful, she still feels like she's victimized by American society. I wanted to see how the students would react to that as a final commentary about what this book means to them. You know, what does it mean about how do you fit in with society? How do you fit in with how does the American dream apply to you? And so we did that in real time. I made sure the excerpt was very short because I realized that doing things on the computer takes a while. So I gave them 30, 40 minutes. And I watched them respond to the response after we talked about how to annotate. And I used their discussion to talk about, so after reading this book, how does this make you feel about your sense of place? How does this make you feel about how you see yourself in the world? Because this one particular section, as I mentioned before, discusses how this woman wasn't sure if the police were going to catch the killers of her son. And as we know from the current day news, that's happening all the time. And I knew that the class was racially diverse, so not everyone had the same experience or could see things the same way. And I got some very interesting responses from that, for them to think about, like, what does it mean to belong? Or you think you belong, but these other forces or situations or people in the real world are saying, no, you don't, because you're different. There's something different about you, or there's something you want to fit in, but you're told you can't.
It's very meta to be reading about, the problem of, or the experience of belonging or not belonging, while also talking about the idea of student belonging. Is part of what helps students feel like they belong something it sounded like you were doing there, which is, and you mentioned this in your sort of preface to your approach to teaching, ensuring that students' personal experience is validated as, part of part of what we're doing when we're in a college course. You know, we're thinking about human experience, and your experience is akin to that. It's not different. It's not other. Do you have students share, you know, their personal experiences in annotation as a way to validate their, you know, life stories alongside of the stories you might read in a lit course?
I do. Usually when I do the annotations, I just tell them annotate. I don't really specify a link. Depending on the assignment, I might say we'll respond to 2 other people or just annotate. And so, I've learned or have seen that if I leave the instructions this way, I don't want to say it becomes a free for all, but I do get some lengthy annotations. And I can tell from the words that are used in the annotations that some people become very upset by what they're reading, or they reply to each other. Because, you know, remote, you might have a few people who talk to you or talk to each other on the computer. It was the same thing in their face-to-face classroom. But at least with the hypothesis, I was able to get everyone to talk, even if people who were like me as a student, the quiet student who didn't say too much but was keeping up with what was going on. I could see how people were really engaging. And some people did share their personal experiences. Some people who were not African American said, I can relate to being in a community where this one community has nice homes and, you know, mowed lawns and so on, but this other community doesn't. Or I remember there was one part where a student, in the same section, Dr. Jones from the excerpt was talking about how she was worried about her son, where her son was killed. But this whole thing about mothers worrying about their children, will their children come back home to them alive? And I had a student talk about how she was pregnant at the time, that was with another baby, that she was worried about the same thing happening to her children. So, and she wasn't even African American as the individuals were in the book. She was from another culture. So I can see how they're connecting to this universal fear that, you know, this is a real thing.
Yeah. You mentioned something in there, Larnell, about quieter students that are maybe less likely to share maybe in a, you know, face-to-face environment, and hypothesis of social annotation being something that helps students participate. Can you talk a little more about that and how that might relate to kind of developing some confidence in, I don't know that quiet students are necessarily feel like they don't belong. I don't know that that's a fair statement, but does social annotation encourage that participation and kind of nurture a sense of belonging? And I do have something to say here, or at least the way that you deploy the tool?
Well, just reflecting on my own experiences as the quiet student in class, I felt like, well, maybe I didn't have anything to say, or depending on the situation in the class, I didn't want to say something and come across as the representative spokesperson for a group of people. So when I do the hypothesis, I just tell them up front, just react to the text. I want you to connect to the text as much as you can, as much as it speaks to you, and that there's no right or wrong answer. And typically in this class, or even in my English one-on-one classes, I actually tell them, okay, I'm not grading for grammar and content, I want to see how you respond to the text. There's no right or wrong answer. And so everyone contributes, even if I don't say like respond to 2 classmates, everyone has something to say. And it's always interesting to see like what parts of the text they do respond to, but at least it shows me that they're participating, or like they're making the effort to participate. So if I never hear their voice or see them, I can see that, well, at least you read it. You read this text and you had something to say, and your ideals are valid, especially if someone responds to it. Or I might just respond to that quiet student that I know is quiet and say, well, those are good ideals, or could you say more about this?
Yeah, I feel like what I'm zeroing in on some sort of revelation here, which is you've talked a couple times about yourself, but also students like, well, I don't have anything to say. I don't have anything to contribute here, right? And that's maybe a common experience, right? And something about certain courses, certain educational contexts maybe doesn't nurture that sense of belonging or that sense of I have something to say. And there's something fundamental about social annotation. When you tell students part of your job here is to say something, right? That is the basic expectation here. And my basic expectation is that you do have something to say. So it kind of flips that idea that like everybody has something to say. In fact, everybody may be required to say something in an annotation. And that's the fundamental assumption of the course and of the technology, is that we all have something to say. And that's why we're here. It's not just to listen to the authors that we read, not just to listen to the teacher, but also to share of ourselves. And that's kind of a fundamental aspect of when you take notes and you're taking notes that are shared, is that we want to hear from you. You have something to say. Are there ever times though where you feel like students are reluctant to annotate, or feel like they still don't have something to say, or that they, because there is a kind of assumption that, do you ever still see that persist, I guess, in the context of annotation, where students are still reluctant to share and feel like they don't have the skills or the experience to participate?
So I would say so far in the times I've used this, I have not detected that reluctance. I would say for some students, they write more in the annotations than they actually verbalize in class. Or for some, it's kind of the same, like as this person talks in class and is annotating a lot and has a lot to say. I don't get any kind of reluctance to it. If there is, there might be the technological part of it, like, well, how do you annotate? So when I introduce the whole concept of annotating a digital document, I demo it for them. Like I show them, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you highlight the text. I type a response to something, and then I show them how to delete it, if they need to change it, and how to reply. So that might be the only reluctance I might get, like, how do you do it? But then I type things to say, like, I'm trying to show you, this is how I'm connecting to the text, how this text is speaking to me, or how, what I'm relating to it. And when I give them instructions for annotating, and it depends on the class and the assignment, usually it's usually guided, like in an English 101 class, it may be something like, okay, let's annotate this paper, the student paper, anonymous student paper, look for the thesis, look for the examples, the counter arguments, or like if it's in an African American studies class and we're reading a historical document or someone's firsthand account, it might be, well, what would you do if you were in this situation? As you read this, think about, like, how does this text connect to you, your world experiences, what you're learning in this class? But then also think about it in terms of, well, what would you do if you were in a similar situation? How would you respond? So I kind of like pose certain questions or things for them to think about while they're reading. And usually it just kind of take off with that. So if there's any reluctance, it might be, well, how do you do this? How do you annotate it? Like, how do you highlight? And that's usually resolved in a minute or so.
Understood. One way that I've been thinking about student belonging, has to do with just the idea of being in college. Am I college material? Do I belong here? Should I be doing something else instead? I think a lot of students lose confidence in themselves as college students and feel like they don't belong, and then sometimes drop out. Is that something that you experience, that students sometimes feel like they don't belong at your college, that they maybe don't have the skills or the potential future, and that's part of your work, is to try to assure them of that and help them develop the skills to be successful in college and feel like they belong?
I do encounter some students who present those concerns. Now, this was before COVID and before I was exposed to social annotation. And if I had the student in class again, I'd wonder how this would work. But I remember one student coming up to me after class asking, how do you read a textbook? This is when I was using a textbook. And I was silent because I wasn't sure how to answer it, because she literally meant, like, how do you read this textbook? And I showed her during office hours, like, well, this is what you should be looking for in a textbook. We kind of did it together. And then she felt a little bit more confident with like, okay, I'm having trouble understanding this material, but I can kind of get through this. Now, I do wonder if I had hypothesis back then, how that would have changed things a little bit, because there's a technology issue. Like, do you have access to well, not so much a technology, but well, like a computer or a phone or something that's working, because you always have that disconnect with remote. But there are a few students who say that, and I tell them, if you need help, I'm here to help you. There are resources here to help you. You can get through this. If you let someone know that you need help, um, those resources can help you. You just have to ask for it and be willing to take a chance. And a lot of them feel comfortable like approaching me and saying, well, I didn't understand this word, because that's actually one of the assignment. One of the instructions in the hypothesis assignment is, identify anything you don't understand and why you don't understand it. Like if there's a word you don't know, or if you're not sure how it's a context. And I can actually see in their annotations, I had to look this up because I wasn't sure, or sometimes I'm not sure how this relates to me. When I tried this with a syllabus, annotating a syllabus to understand why that syllabus is important to them to being in this class, for them to be successful. And some of them, well, I try not to take it personally, but some of them were wondering, well, why is it, why is late work penalized, or why is plagiarism that serious, or something to that effect? And I would respond and say, well, your ideals are supposed to be your own. So when I tried it with the syllabus, they can see, well, this is why you're here. This is why this document is relevant to your success as a student, and why you need to follow it. May not read it, but why you need to at least be aware of how this is going to contribute to your success. This is what's expected of you.
That's so interesting. I wanted to focus in on one thing that you said there, that student that said, how do you read the textbook? And then you walked her through it in your office hours. Do you think that some of that same work is done of like, I don't know, whether it's through peers or through your own participation, or just through the fact that students are, literally using a tool to read, that some of that same work, kind of learning to read the text, may not be a textbook, and maybe these OER resources that you're using now, but like that idea of kind of learning to read at the college level is assisted by social annotation or hypothesis?
Oh, I would certainly think so. Because first of all, I can see that they read it. And I can see it, especially if I do it in class, I see it in real time. So they're annotating on the screen, and I'm looking at their annotations on another screen to see how I'm going to tailor the discussion afterwards. I'll give you an example. In the English 101 class, we were looking at a paper that had a thesis statement. Well, they were looking at a student paper, and one of the questions was, where is the thesis statement? And half the class picked one and the other class picked another part of the paper. So half of them got it right, the other half got it wrong. And I saw that, and I had them look at it on the screen, and actually had someone read it out loud to like, okay, let's read what's on the screen. Like, how does this sound to you? Does it sound like a clear statement? Or why did you pick this? So we kind of talked about their choices they made, and we looked at the mechanics of it, like where it was placed, how the buildup led to this being the actual thesis statement versus it wasn't the actual thesis statement. And that's one of the student learning outcomes, is that close critical reading of the text. So this has allowed me to kind of see it in action. Like, yes, you really did read it, or you misread it, or you have questions about it. Let's talk about these questions. Let's talk about why you had these questions about this text. So if I introduce it, if we do a social annotation exercise at the beginning of class, that shapes the rest of it. So I might have an idea like what I want to do the last 50 minutes, but it depends on what I see on the screen and how they respond to the text and what they're pointing out to me, so that I can kind of guide them or see, okay, no, this isn't a thesis, or this is not really a good example. It depends on what they're looking at, but it kind of, I can kind of, it's more or less, here it is, read it, and then let me see how you're reading it. And then we can go back and see what was missed or what you should have seen earlier. But we also, before I even use social annotation in the class, not so much in my African American Studies class, but in my English class, English 101, we talk about what does it mean to read. So I actually asked them, like, well, what do you like to read? What do you read, or how often do you read? Can you read on the computer screen, or do you prefer the book? Because I'm using OERs and we're going to be reading things on the screens. And I just tell them, just be honest. If you don't like to read, that's fine. Just like I told them, if you don't like to write, that's fine too. Just tell me that. At least I know where they're coming from. And then we talk about their reading experiences in general. And then it's like, well, I'm going to introduce hypothesis to you. I'm going to show you how we're going to read these texts on a digital format and how to respond, so that that's going to influence, you know, how are you reading? Did you miss something? Or should we go back and look at this again? And to kind of see, I can see, like I said, I can see in action how they're meeting those SLOs.
That's great. It strikes me that another aspect of cultivating belonging in a classroom that you clearly possess just as a teacher, but maybe that hypothesis helps a little bit with, is just the attention that you're giving to your students. You're aware, your attempt to understand where they're coming from. You're wanting to understand where they're coming from. You're responding to their responses to where they're coming from, so that that's just a huge part. I mean, I imagine the students in your courses really do feel like they belong because you are really listening to them and changing how you teach and responding to teaching them and teaching the class in that way. I want to pause here and open it up for discussion. I have been super focused in on Larnell's story, so I haven't followed the chat. But I do think looks like there's some good conversation in there. There may be some folks in the chat who have their own experiences of trying to cultivate student belonging in courses. So we'd love to hear from folks' questions, but also to share their experiences at this point. And if any of my colleagues have things they think would be worth surfacing from the chat, I'll pause, and looks like Franny's has unmuted her video to maybe share some questions.
Yeah, and actually Claire Donahue or Donahue would like to be unmuted to ask a question. So I think I'll do that.
Hi, so my name's Claire. I have taught intro composition classes like English 101, 102 before. I'm in a new role now where I am working for Harvard's Med School with their certificate programs, helping doctors kind of relearn skills. And one of the programs I'm on is a effective writing one. And we're looking at potentially using hypothesis as a way to help them with their online learning components. And I think one of my questions is, what do you think is going to be a beneficial way for me to utilize a tool like this for learners who might already have set habits for annotations and like reading habits, but the instructors on these programs are trying to adjust it so that way they're kind of tweaking their behaviors and habits to be a little bit more effective. So I think that's my question of like integrating this type of program and trying to get anybody's experience with, I think, behavior modifications, if that makes sense.
Claire, one point of clarification I wanted to get from you is, are you saying effective or affective? Like to be more...
Oh, sorry, effective, E.
Effective, okay. So, I mean, I think from my perspective, and Larnell, I'd be interested if you have ideas here. The neat thing about social annotation is that, you know, people may have their own habits of note-taking and annotation that may precede the introduction of a tool like hypothesis. But one of the benefits of a tool like hypothesis and hypothesis assignments is that a teacher can be pretty structured in how they expect students to read, and can design assignments for certain reading practices. Say, and this is not a great example for you, Claire, but if I was really, you know, trying to drill poetic analysis, you know, I might have students be looking for very specific poetic elements in a poem, diction, theme, allusion, meter, different aspects of poetry, and say, these are the things you're looking for here, and sort of drill into them and sort of guide the assignment with specific, you know, like I said, reading strategies. And so I think you can identify the reading strategies that you're trying to cultivate. You can design an assignment around that. And one great tool for making this even more visible in a hypothesis exercise is using hypothesis tags. So if there are 5 keys to effective annotation in the context in which your instructors are teaching and trying to nurture student reading habits, you can identify those and they could become tags. And so students could really, you metacognitively calling out the work that's being done in those annotations and just become aware of, you may have had previous reading strategies, but these are the reading strategies we're cultivating here. And it kind of just brings it to the foreground. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Larnell.
No, that's very similar to what I do depending on the course. Like this week in my intro to lit class, we're reading drama. And the students were introduced to free text pyramid, which is the various parts of a play, like the rising action, the introduction, the crisis, and so on. So they're reading 2 one-act plays, and each one-act play has a hypothesis associated with it. And I want them to apply that pyramid to those plays, like where in the play is the exposition, where in the play is the rising action, where in the play is the resolution, and so on. So I want them to read. And the other question related to that was like, how does that identification of those parts of the play influence your appreciation of the play? So I'm approaching this assignment in terms of like, how are you appreciating drama in general? Because it's meant to be performed. So they're reading it, but they're also applying this structure to each play that they're reading. So I can see, like, you can find it in each part. So sometimes the assignments are guided that way. There's certain things I want you to look for because I want to see this in your paper or your assignments. And other times it's like, just connect to it. How are you responding to it in general?
It's one of the neat things about the tool, that it can be used in a wide variety of contexts, very specific things, but also just eliciting responses. It strikes to me with your response, especially Larnell, that what Claire is asking is kind of like what people are always doing with social annotation, right? You're always teaching specific reading strategies in specific contexts. Students will be coming with either zero experience or some experience that might be not, totally directly relevant, like learning how to analyze a poem very specifically. You might have listened to lyrics in a song before and have some sense of like, how to interpret meaning, but just to develop some structure around that as part of the work that you can do with social annotation. There was one question in the chat that I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if I put words in your mouth at all in this to this degree, Larnell, but it's about asking students to share personal experience, whether in annotations or in other contexts. And somebody in the chat asked, are there any privacy concerns around asking students to speak about personal experience? Simon up back about 22 minutes ago, are there any concerns about privacy when asking students to share their personal experiences on hypothesis? Now, I would also just say, are there any concerns about privacy when asking students to share their personal experiences? End of sentence, whether it's in face-to-face in class or in other contexts. So I'm not sure if Simon's question is related to like data privacy of having those student annotations within our system, which I could speak to. But I'm also just curious from more of a pedagogical perspective, that sensitivity around students being asked to share their experience. Is that a big part of what you're doing when you teach, is asking students to talk about the personal experience? And do you ever worry about privacy in that regard?
Well, when the hypothesis assignment is, show me how you're connecting to the text, those personal experiences sort of come out, especially the ones that are very detailed, like I can relate to this because this happened to me kind of thing. They know that it's not leaving the classroom, so to speak. They know it's not leaving Brightspace. They know it's not, I'm going to like share it on TikTok or something. It just stays here. It's within our classroom discussion. And I do usually tell them, if you don't feel comfortable sharing it, that's fine. I even do that with writing assignments. I tell them, well, if this is really personal, if you don't feel comfortable sharing it, then that's okay. So they know that, they kind of know, like, they need to know their comfort level about it. But in general, so far, I've not had any like significant concerns with privacy. It's just within the classroom, someone will post something, someone will respond to it and say, hey, I had a similar experience, or I know what you mean. And then, I may, depending on the assignment, I may ask them to elaborate on it if they feel comfortable about it. But that's no significant concerns.
I'll just basically piggyback on that by saying that your stipulation that this doesn't leave the classroom and this doesn't leave Brightspace is, how Hypothesis functions in terms of data privacy as well. Like people who have access to this course in D2L or whatever the course in whatever LMS it is will have access to these annotations. But it's not, there's no sharing of those annotations. We as a company don't have access to them. Other people outside don't have access to them. So we piggyback on the privacy guidelines of the school and of the LMS. We're officially at time, but Franny, is there anything urgent from the chat to bring up here?
There's a really good question from Ethnale. Hopefully I've pronounced their name right. They want to know, can you make some recommendations about redirecting students away from reading each other's annotations and not the text to be annotated? I am finding that my students' annotations can be derivative and thus enact a weakened kind of social reading. What kinds of strategies do you have to get away from this kind of reading?
Very interesting. Larnell, do you have that experience? Do you feel like people are cribbing off each other or being derivative? Or is that even a problem, I'd say, right? Because those students are reading and writing, but I do hear the concern that you want students to also be engaging with the text. You don't want them to be just reading annotations and you want them to have ideas of their own. What are your thoughts, Larnell?
So far, I have not seen that as a problem. I guess if it's like approaching that, it might be something like, well, I agree with what the author said, or it's something really short where I can kind of tell this person's just annotating to say they annotated and you didn't really think about it. But from the ones I have seen, they're usually, oh, I can relate to this, or I see what this writer means. It's usually very detailed. And then someone will read their response, especially if it's an assignment where I say respond to 2 of your peers. It's just like the virtual conversation. I'm sorry, it's just like an in-person conversation. It's like you're piggybacking off of what someone else has said. So it's almost like we're in class talking to each other. So I haven't seen that as a major concern. Like, oh, I'm just going to repeat what someone else says. They tend to be, I can tell they tend to be, this is what this person really thinks.
I want to go back to, for me, one of the salient sort of points of our discussion, which is this idea of like, you have something to say, right? That's the point of us being here. That's the point of this tool. To some extent, that's extra technical in the sense that it's not based on the tool. It's about cultivating a sense in the classroom that like you have something to say. If you're being derivative or you're just copying what other people are saying, that's not the point. That's not the point of this tool. That's also not the point of the class. That's not the point of this conversation. Is like the whole point is that you have something to say. That's my headline for for our conversation. And I might, if I was still in the classroom, put that up somewhere in the classroom. Like you have something to say. That's why we're here. This tool can help. Other things can help too. Larnell, I want to give you the last word. If there's anything about your experience with social annotation or your ideas about belonging that you wanted to share, that you were excited to talk about today, that I failed as an interviewer to elicit. Any final thoughts?
I would say my experiences have been very positive. As I said, I have used this in composition classes, literature courses, even a social science class. I experimented with it in the fall. Now, this semester, I use it pretty much in every class in some shape or form, not every week, every once in a while. For my classes that are completely online, the World Wide Web courses, it sometimes replaces a discussion board, to kind of break up the monotony of like post your answers to this question by Friday or Saturday and respond to a peer. So it kind of replaces that too. And I would certainly do it again because I have found it to be a very effective way to engage students in the text. If anything, it's pushed me to think, okay, what can I do next semester? What can I get them to read next semester to respond to that's relevant, that could speak to them. Since they're, they come from such diverse backgrounds and reading and writing experiences, what can I do to excite them about reading? Because when I ask them, do you like to read? And half of them say no, or I just read when I have to. At least this way, it's like, well, maybe you can see how exciting reading is. How it can open up your mind to new experiences. And if it's a writing class, this is one way you can learn how to write, by just reading. So I feel like it kind of brings back this practice of just the enjoyment of reading back, to see that it can be fun. It's tying into technology, which we're using now, and you can get something out of it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Larnell. I want to connect with you outside of this because I have a background in African-American literature as well, and did some research on Chicago authors specifically. So I'm going to hit you up to have to continue the conversation both about annotation, student belonging, but also about some of the courses that you teach. And I just want to say to the audience and to others, I'm very excited to continue the conversation around student belonging and social annotation. I feel like it's really a critical issue in higher ed, really in education more generally. I do think it's something that social annotation can help with. So I look forward, Franny, that maybe we can have some future episodes and we could have Larnell back to talk about belonging with some others who teach in different contexts and have different strategies. And I'm looking forward to that conversation continuing. Thanks for your time today, Larnell.
My pleasure.